in a vacuum for either one of these necessarily. I'm just saying if the ultimatum comes down to it has to either be the Insurrection Act with military troops rolling around our streets, or it has to be more people taking on the Second Amendment. I think the longest lasting solution to that is people becoming wise to the inherent rights that they have in our Second Amendment, the God-given rights they have of self-defense, and leaving that as a legacy into future generations. So you follow me there? There's a very short-term solution for using the military to stop something. It stops it, it's done, they're gone. What do you do after they're gone? My solution is to let communities solve that problem, possibly for themselves, become wise as to what the Second Amendment means, understand how to operate a firearm. And I'm telling y'all right now, man, if the word gets out that some of these communities just don't take nonsense, there will be no nonsense. I feel like I'm pretty consistent and correct about that. And I lost the thing a second ago, man. I apologize, but I had Stacy's comment here pulled up in a second ago, and he essentially said the exact same thing. And I'll say right now, man, it's a strange new world that we're entering into, where opinions are changing in a multitude of things. Lines are becoming blurred. Liberals are becoming far more supportive of the Second Amendment than they ever were previously. And this is something that I really do think that Republicans would do ourselves a great service by picking up on some of this little hushed narrative that we're just now not noticing. Sean, if you could, back under the national section there, national story section. Pick up on that story with a National Review says that gun sales spike, FBI background checks, smash records. That's good. Now, you'll see this right here. Okay, this is coming from the National Review. Gun sales and accompanying FBI background checks spiked last month, breaking records as the nation weathered the coronavirus pandemic and riots broke out in major cities over the death of George Floyd. Already this year, what are we in June? Already this year, the FBI has recorded 15 million background checks in the National Instant Criminal Background Checking System, closing in on breaking last year's record of 28 million background checks. Now, last year's record was driven by this whole rhetoric of, school shootings and needing to be able to do something about that, and the David Hogg scenario and all this stuff that we understand. That was driven out of a sense of not necessarily fear, but maybe a run on the market type thing where they're going to stop producing. That was driven out of something of a bit of speculation. This stuff here is driven out of pure practicality. This stuff here is driven out of pragmatism. This stuff here is driven because people are trying to figure out, like, okay, man, and I don't know if people are picking up on what I said before of the inevitable outcome that will happen if you take power back from police and they become less authoritative. If we do things like Justin Amash is throwing in there right now, Daniel said in Facebook a second ago, if you remove qualified immunity, that would do far more than the Insurrection Act would. He has another proposal out here as well. Another proposal, U.S. lawmaker. See then the Reuters story here in just a second. You scroll down the notes there just a little bit, Sean. You'll see it right past the next section. U.S. lawmaker prepares bill aiming to end court protections for police. If we do some of these things, which I advocate that we do, understand it is going to come with a reaction. For every action, there is something to go that's going to be equal and opposite necessarily. The opposite in this case for Republicans, I believe, is a winning strategy to pitch them on the idea. That means gung-ho Second Amendment, y'all. That means figuring it out for yourselves. That means my buddy Maj Toure. Maj Toure is a guy that we've had on this program several times, man, that says gun laws are racist. Gun laws are racist. In the history of this country, restricting gun laws at its very nature, at its core, was primarily, to start with, meant so that minorities couldn't get them. Now, this is wildly radical stuff that I'm talking about here, y'all, because it's coming on the back end of a story of one of the worst death scenarios in the weekend of Chicago that was happened this year. I had that story pinned in the last Chaos Capital show notes. And I know what it sounds like I'm saying is, what are you going to give more guns to some of these inner city folks? And believe it or not, I am saying yes. That is what I'm saying. It sounds wild. I get it. It sounds slightly revolutionary. I get it. But follow my buddy Maj Toure. Maj Toure goes into the inner cities and coaches gun safety courses. He teaches you proper trigger discipline. He tells you the proper terminology is for a magazine, not a clip. He tells you what happens to get when a police officer comes upon you to indicate that you have a firearm on your person or in your car. He teaches you the proper safety mechanisms of how to use it, how to shoot it, to understand the 4 or 5 basic principles that comes in any gun safety course. He gets you trained up. He gets you your firearm carry license. What the Second Amendment means to all of us, to the Constitution, to the Bill of Rights, he teaches to these kids in the inner city. And when you have a proper respect for the way you're supposed to use it, you then, in turn, have a proper respect for self-defense. And I'm telling you right now, I really do believe at a community-driven level, at a local level, that is a far better solution than having a bunch of military come down here. It's not just me. Back to the story. I got off on a wild tangent here. National Review, gun sales spike. Gun sales and accompanying FBI background checks. We're talking 15 million this year, about to break the record of 28 million. A total of 3,091,455 checks were recorded in May, the highest May number since the system was created 22 years ago. That's the highest May number since that system was created 22 years ago. Market forces are doing this. This isn't just me. That's the third highest month on record in 22 years. The highest numbers of checks in 1 month occurred in March, which were recorded 3.7 million, 3,740,688 checks. This is the highest May ever recorded, third highest month. You want to know what the highest month is? The highest number of checks in 1 month that occurred? March. Meanwhile, gun sales have surged since the start of this coronavirus pandemic. April saw 1.7 million firearms purchased, a 71% spike from the previous April. Gun sales spiked higher in March with 2.6 million purchases, an 85.3% increase over the previous year, according to Small Arms Analytics and Forecasting. Now, some of this might have been out of fear of what's stuff going to do if we shut down, what if the economy collapses. I get that. But ultimately, this goes to what Shine's been preaching the entire time. A lot of this stuff is revolved around self-responsibility. What comes with the idea of freedom is also the freedom to fail. And what comes with the idea of freedom is the freedom to choose what's correct and best for your family. Man, I'm telling y'all right now, leaders are not going to solve this stuff for us. They're not. Military marching through your street, it's not going to solve this stuff. Ultimately, it will correct the problem today and tomorrow and next week. Absolutely. No doubt about it. It already has. Shine's 100% correct about that. It literally did in a 15-hour period. My only argument here, and I want to kick it to Shine and maybe some people in the Facebook section as well. My only argument here is for a lasting solution, generational change type stuff. I believe the idea behind the Second Amendment is much, much bigger than just a firearm. It's much bigger than a hot lead projectile. What it is, it's about empowerment. It's about self-defense. It's about communities solving problems for themselves, being able to have the power in an autonomous sense to protect themselves from outside threats. Because ultimately, you cannot rely upon somebody else. And the further you get outside of that community, almost like a concentric circle, the further you get outside of those communities, the longer a solution will take to trickle back into yours. So again, I say one more time, man, if we take power out of the police state, that vacuum will be filled by something. I would like it to be filled by this. Sean, I know we're getting close to the end of the program here, man, but I want to give you a chance to respond. Maybe hit some Facebook or YouTube comments. I honestly don't even know if that thing was controversial. And there's one update I want to hit from that church story as of yesterday, but I just want to give you a quick time to respond if you want, man.
I think the Second Amendment's great, and it's really great. No, I know. I'm sorry. I mean, to me,
I kind of put you on the spot there. You know?
No, it's not that I don't know what to say. It's kind of like I'm so glad reality is coming back.
Yeah.
The reason people are buying guns is reality is slapping them in the face. It's going, hey, McFly, hello. You're safer if you can defend yourself. You're not safer when you, what do you call that? Move it away from you. Move that responsibility away from you and outside of you and put it on someone else. You know what I'm saying? You're safer. And I'm glad that reality is telling people the truth. Because the truth will keep you safe.
Here's here, by the way, is the statement from Stacy. He dropped off a second, but he said, U.S. using military personnel against U.S. citizens on U.S. soil at the scale being called for isn't a slippery slope. It's leaping off a cliff. Shine posted that in the Zoom thing that we're here in just a second, so I appreciate him for posting that. It's not just a slippery slope; it's leaping off a cliff. Hey, and Shine, man, yeah, you want to do that? Okay, yeah, because I didn't know if, yeah. Yeah. So this is a story that's been reported on by the Federalist, and I did the best I could here. You'll see it in the show notes. Go ahead and pull that up if you want to. But I did the best I could to source this from somebody else. So I don't know if this has just become a he said she said type thing. I don't know if the Federalist is just running sort of point for the White House here. I'm not trying to make a point of this at all necessarily. I'm just putting this information out there. Yeah, exactly. Right. And it's become this story of like the media said one thing and the people that were actually there have said something totally different. So here's the story, okay? Bringing everyone up to speed. This is the story from the Federalist. You'll see the headline: media falsely claimed violent riots were peaceful and the tear gas was used against rioters. The update to that story, at least coming from the people, is this. After thousands of false tweets, print stories, and broadcast stories to the contrary, local journalist, a guy named Neil Augustin, WTPO, reported that a Park police officer source said that tear gas was actually never used. It was actually smoke canisters that were deployed, which don't have an uncomfortable irritant to them, Further, the source said that the crowd was dispersed because of projectiles that were being thrown at peaceful protesters at the Park police, and because peaceful protesters had climbed on top of a structure at Lafayette Park that had been burned the prior night. Now, this is coming from Sergeant Eduardo Delgado. Just presenting the information that they're giving here. This is coming from Sergeant Eduardo Delgado, the public. Yeah, he's the public information officer of the Park Police. He confirmed that the agency did not use tear gas. And later this afternoon, the United States Park Police acting chief, this is the Park Police acting chief, this guy's named Gregory Monahan, he explained the entire narrative as follows. On Monday, June 1st, the USPP worked with the United States Secret Service to have temporary fencing installed inside Lafayette Park. At approximately 6:33 p.m., violent protests on H Street Northwest began throwing projectiles, including bricks, frozen bottles, and caustic liquids. The protesters also climbed onto the historic building in the north end of Lafayette Park that was destroyed by arson days prior. Intelligence had revealed calls for violence against the police officers, and officers found caches of glass bottles, baseball bats, metal poles hidden along the street. To curtail the violence that was underway, the USPP followed established policy, issuing 3 warnings over a loudspeaker to alert the demonstrators on A Street to evacuate the area. Horse-mounted patrol, civil disturbance units, and additional personnel were used to clear the area. As many of the protesters became more combative, continued to throw projectiles, and attempted to grab officers' weapons, officers then employed the use of smoke canisters and pepper balls. No tear gas was used by the USPP officers or other assisting law enforcement personnel to close the area in Lafayette Park. Subsequently, the fence was installed. Prior to getting the actual facts, nearly every single major media outlet, this article indicates, falsely reported on the idea that canisters of tear gas, not smoke canisters, were used against the protesters. The full story spread internationally despite of its evidence. And then this story actually goes on to list like every single outlet that listed this here. And I will say, man, like, look, this could become a story of the he said, she said, the government response as opposed to what was actually happening. The fact that the media reported on, even Axios, even some stuff that has very, heavily sourced stuff inside the White House. Axios was even pulling from some of that, saying like, I felt just terrible about what we did. We used tear gas. So make of this what you will. But I will say, if there is anything to the narrative that it wasn't a peaceful protest, I think in some minds that might actually change a little bit. If someone's becoming violent and you're clearing out a violence disturbance, now again, it is still to make way of Trump doing what he did yesterday, or was it the day before? It doesn't matter. But it paints it in an entirely different picture. I mean, Sean, I kind of want to give you, I'm just rambling a little bit here, but let me give you a little bit of space to talk on this some, man. Because I don't know, it's an important update, I think, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. I mean, to me, as someone who watched what was happening Friday night and Saturday night at the White House, I really thought that a crowd of of hundreds of people was going to rush the White House on Friday and Saturday night, both times at certain points. And to me, the fact that they didn't have fencing further off seemed silly. To me, the idea of moving people back and saying we're going to put a new delineation here made a lot of sense to me, but I'd been watching the protest. I wasn't someone who's scrolling on Twitter and only sees the smoke fly and the president walk. Like, I'd been watching all of it, and I watched for 7 hours last night. I can tell you that I don't know if they use some kind of criminology or not criminology, or just people moving technology. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But the protests were so much better with there being 100 yards between the protesters and the riot police with a fence, multiple fences between them. It went so much better than it was a chest-high fence with police right on the other side. That was not going well. So, and I don't pretend that I know what's going on either on these streams, even as I'm watching them, because I only have my perspective. And you really have to go with the people who were there. And I would take what the government says, as always, with a grain of salt. But those people were there. And find other corroborations from people who were there. People who were actually there. Now, they could be lying, but at least they were actually there. Don't take something from a newspaper in another country or another city or from a person who was not there and just throw in your narrative of the way you think the government works or the way you think these protest people work or the rioters, however you want to put it, whatever, and then throw that in there as a fact. It's really important, especially during all these times, to not see an image with words underneath it and assume you know the truth, because you don't. You just don't. Right. And you also have to accept the fact that you might not ever. And you got to be really vigilant. And I'm not saying that like, oh my gosh, you'll never know anything, but you might not for a while know things for sure. So what does that mean? That just means you can't be a moral high horse about everything. You got to really humble yourself and say, you know what, the beginning of wisdom is understanding that I probably don't know that much. And that doesn't mean I can't act. I know enough to act in my community. Like Shine knows enough where I can be a perfectly functional adult, not knowing whether or not there was actually tear gas in D.C. or not, right? I can still be a functioning adult. So it's not incapacitating to say I don't know. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you don't understand. It doesn't mean you're not an adult. So I would just say, please, be humble. But I will say this, the tactics worked, man. The tactics worked. And there didn't seem to be a high price to pay. There were less people arrested last night. There was almost no looting in D.C. Almost zero. I mean, and I was watching video. I saw one trash can get pushed over. Didn't see any police violence. I saw people in the protest groups making, like you said, those hard lines of delineation. We're the peaceful protesters. Those people over there, go get them. Those are the people.
Right, yeah, that's the important part, right?
And I think that all, and libertarians are going to hate this, I think that all came from, not from people wanting to be good people. It came from the underlying threat of violence. Not violence by choice, but violence like this is what happens. A plus B equals C. If you destroy lots of property, violence. If you start a fight with someone else, violence. If you try to break things, violence. And they were so cognitive of that. And it was really impressive. It was really impressive the way that the people controlled bad actors last night.
And I will say this guy named Garrett Hockey, he's a reporter for WTOP. I believe it's a local affiliate that was on the ground. His initial reporting on this was as of June 2nd, 10:54 a.m., said Park Police advanced down H Street, or Secret Service and National Guard were on the fence line of Lafayette Park, occasionally firing pepper balls and less lethal projectiles at protesters on CS. I don't quite know what that means. Whatever. On CS experience, the burning sensation in my lung, it caused in my lungs, and I'm in my retired Marine security. That sentence doesn't make sense at all. I think what he's saying is like it caused a burning sensation in my lungs along with my retired Marine security. However,
appeal to authority plus I had symptoms.
Yeah, I got you. Right. And apparently now there's a different type story here where he's saying I was there. Tear gas was definitely used, and the park police cannot deny that. There was no object throwing before the mounted police moved in. Don't want to tell you how to do your job, but using a background source to deny observable facts seems like a bad call. So this is what I'm saying, and I think all Sean is saying too. Just source check yourself, okay? When you have conflicting stories like this, try and figure out if you can get something on the ground. And I honestly, bro, I think what probably might have happened here, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe Secret Service handles their stuff, but I think like a lot of other situations, man, there was a few people there that were probably trying to cause a ruckus, and the entire group unfortunately got associated with that by way of association. A bunch of people had a bunch of, like, I don't know, maybe bats and bars and whatever, like they said, glass objects, and maybe there were projectiles being thrown. I don't know. I mean, I wasn't there. Clearly, I wasn't there.
There were objects being thrown the night before. I'll say that. Right? I mean, is it not? It's one of those things where someone could say, isn't it believable the government would tear gas protesters? And you go, well, I guess it's believable. And then someone else could say, but isn't it believable that these people you've been watching break things all over the country and in D.C. for days? Isn't it believable they were throwing projectiles? And that's the space we have to get out of. We have to get out of using some kind of narrative to prove factual points. You can't throw out, is it believable? That's not going to be good enough in today's time.
Let me, by the way, Daniel Snowden and Stacy just told me that CS, is that when I said on CS experience from that tweet that I just read, CS is a type of tear gas, they're saying. That makes sense. Okay. So let me just say this, man. I'll be as honest with the audience as possible right now. I mean, a large part of my problem with what happened yesterday was this story that we heard of forcibly removing protesters so that it could be used as a scene. Now, even if that didn't happen, I would still have a problem inherently with the spectacle that was created yesterday. I explained that yesterday. We had a great conversation about that, by the way, after the show. I'll be honest with the audience right now, though. I'm not going to try and make a point on this. I'm not going to try and figure this out yet. I think I would do myself a disservice and the show a disservice if I just try to make a definitive point right now. We would tell people to go find the information. I'm gonna look into this a little bit more too, right? I honestly don't know. I mean, I'm not even going to try and make sense of it right now. I'm not. That's where I'm going to leave it at right now, buddy. Seriously, I think that's the healthiest thing to do, because if it was a situation like we're saying where they're throwing projectiles and stuff is getting done and they, the president's coming through or something, and they were asked 3 times if it wasn't a peaceful protest, if it was turning violent, I don't know. How do you respond to that type of thing? If it was a thing where they just need to clear out a way where they're just like throwing, I don't know, man. I mean, you can hear that it's verbal vomit right now because it's actual cognitive dissonance that's going on in my head right now.
Well, but we're still getting back to should or shouldn't. And we're talking about what we don't know. And I'll say this, someone who watched the protest last night, what I do know is what was enacted in D.C. last night kept everyone safer, not the other way around. I do know that. Like, that's not conjecture. I don't have to figure out what kind of tear gas or whatever is. I don't have to figure out if the government's lying. I don't have to figure out if protesters were violent or anything like that. I know for a fact that D.C. last night was a safer place than it was over the weekend. Now, do I necessarily know why? No. I'm not going to say I know why. I know why. But I do know it was safer. And then there are context clues you can pull from that. But that's all I'll say, because we really need to stick to what we know, for sure.
Let me go to the Facebook comments here, too. Daniel says, Lafayette Park comments are about tear gassing people so Trump could use the church as a Bible, and the Bible as a prop for a photo shoot at the church that didn't want him there. Bob said, CS means chlorine sulfate, which is exactly the same thing that we refer to as tear gas. And when you are exposed to it, you will know, he says. I suppose what Bob is indicating there is that there's a difference between these pepper balls and the tear gas. If it's tear gas, you would absolutely know that it's going to be tear gas as opposed to a canister with smoke. Either way, man, awkward place to end the show here right now, buddy. But it's one of the stories that you just want to make sure we get the information out on, because it's either going to be a dead story tomorrow or no one's going to care about it tomorrow because we're going to move on to different things. I would direct people to a few other things in the show notes if you want to. Representative King, he lost primary last night, so he's gone, at least for the time being. Scroll down to the Evergreen carryover section down there. Chief Justice Roberts has ended up siding, and I say has, this happened like Monday or Tuesday, so it's a little bit old now, but whatever. He sided with liberal justices as Supreme Court rules against challenge to state limits on church attendance. Supreme Court ruled against a challenge to state limits, which essentially, if put in the positive, means that they agreed with the states in a constitutional way that they are allowed to limit a bunch of stuff is the way the churches meet, right? Now, importantly, there was two things. There was one for Illinois and there was one for California. The Illinois one they're saying might have been rendered moot because the Illinois governor came out and said, like, you know what, I'm going to step up. Y'all can meet in church if you want to. This is a Romanian church that actually brought this. So it hits a little bit, close to home, near and dear to my wife is Romanian. And we actually have, not some connections with that in particular, but all the Romanians know each other. I'll say that much. There's a link in the description in the show notes there too, at the very bottom of the response from that Romanian church. I would strongly advise y'all watch that response. That guy is awesome. That guy is absolutely awesome and says, like, we're going to keep fighting this. Like, we're going to keep, yeah, we can meet now, but the problem is they said the issue was moot, but it doesn't matter because next time around, if this hits again in the fall, what's the governor going to do then? He's just going to reinstitute the same shutdown and we're going to continue to have a problem. Lastly, if you want to, check out that American Conservative article indicating what the legal framework is for what we're talking about right now with this police situation. And I think that's most of the stories that I included there today, man. As we end the show here, maybe want to check out that story about Apple warning looters, say don't steal our iPhones because they're tracking y'all. We'll hit that story tomorrow. It's just a funny story. Goodness gracious. My name is Mr. Henry, by the way. Just trying to be honest with the audience. I love y'all for coming in and checking us out every single day. RealNewsRadio.live is where you can find all our stuff. Again, big shout out to Shine for growing the community over the last night here, putting in the time and effort to give you the live streams directly on the ground as they're happening. Mr. Henry again, shining off. Shining off. Oh, dude, see, I just stumbled. That was Freudian almost. We're shining off. Not even signing off. Shining off for my boy, David Shine Thompson. See you tomorrow.